Paul's story shows us that no one is so good that they don't desperately need God's grace. And no one is so bad that they're beyond the reach of God's grace. To the early Christians, if anyone appeared irredeemable, it was Saul or Paul, but he became a trophy of God's grace. There was a British slave ship captain in the 18th century who, by all accounts, including his own, was one of the most vile people. But the Lord miraculously saved him, and he became a minister, wrote several famous hymns, and fought against the evils of the slave trade in England. And one day, late in his life, he was asked how he kept from despairing over those who were not converted to Christianity. And he explained that he did so by, quote, remembering who I was, remembering who I am now, and remembering and expecting that the God who saved a wretch like me can do the same work in others. And if that language sounds familiar, it's because this slave ship captain turned minister was John Newton, who wrote the famous hymn, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. If God has changed who we are by his miraculous grace, then why do we often approach others as if he couldn't do the same for them? Often, it's the person that we think least likely to be saved by God's grace is the one who is. Because salvation is entirely by grace, there's really no one more or less likely to be saved by grace. I met a Christian a few years ago named Brian Welch, who traveled speaking to teenagers about Jesus. And he had formerly been in the heavy rock band Korn. That's Korn with a K. Those of you who know it, no, it's certainly not a Christian band. The list goes on. Rock legend Alice Cooper experienced God's grace and now teaches Sunday school. More recently, Kanye West has proclaimed that Jesus is king. Serial killer David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam killer, wrote a book from prison called Son of Hope after meeting Jesus. And Jeffrey Dahmer, before he died in prison, came to rest on God's amazing grace and was baptized. No one is beyond the reach of the gospel of grace. How can we trust the gospel of grace? By first, its origin, it comes from God. Second, its impact, it changes lives. And finally, its purpose. This gospel glorifies God. Martin Luther, in the early 16th century, wrestled with this question: how can we trust the gospel of grace? And Luther writes in his commentary on Galatians about a man named Dr. Staupitz, a doctor of the church, like a professor, who came to him and said, I like that the doctrine which you proclaim gives glory to God alone and none to man. For never can too much glory, goodness, and mercy be ascribed to God. Luther goes on to say, the gospel is true because it deprives men of all glory, wisdom, and righteousness and turns over all the honor to the Creator alone. And it is safer to attribute too much glory unto God than unto man.